It's a pleasure and an honor for me to be here today with you and to talk with you about my experience in medicine. I will tell you that medicine is the kind of profession where once you train, you really can do anything you want with it. And seeing patients and delivering care is just one thing on that list. I think I will share with you my background, and it'll give you the sense of the fact that I have attention deficit disorder. I'm a bit of a gypsy, and I believe in moving around. I think it's healthy. I think changing what you do is important in life and your work life. And I can tell you that my experience has been positive, especially in retrospect. I did start off in internal medicine, and then decided I wanted to try my hand at research, see if it fit for me, bench research. And I spent some time at the National Institutes of Health. Decided I didn't like it. Then I came back to clinical medicine and trained in neurology, because that was the field that interested me. That was before scanning, when neurology was an intellectual field. And I trained in neurology and then recognized that I wanted to do an academic career. And as such, I realized I couldn't just be a neurologist. I had to be a stroke neurologist or a seizure guy or a neurophysiologist. And the part of neurology that interested me most was neuro-ophthalmology. So then I did an ophthalmology training program, thinking it would make me a better clinician if I was trained in both spheres. And after that I did some fellowship time. And then I had to face the fact that I had to get a job. So I started off at the University of Arizona on the faculty there, and then moved to the University of California in San Diego, and then to the University of California in San Francisco and Pacific Medical Center. And as I was doing this, I was seeing patients and doing clinical research and having administrative roles, running the residency training programs. And I recognized that as I was moving up the academic ladder, the skill set that I did not have was one of management. As an ophthalmologist, they don't train you how to manage or how to do a business. And so I went and got an MBA at a business school in the University of Rochester in New York. And then I moved on to become chairman at that University of Rochester, and then moved to GW. When I moved to Washington, D.C., I looked around and said, who could my natural partners be in ophthalmology? And I didn't have to look very far up the road to see the Food and Drug Administration, and recognize that that was a unique organization that would be wonderful to partner with. And so I brought the FDA team onto my faculty at GW, and we established a healthy relationship and a fellowship training program in drug development and ophthalmology at the FDA. And then I stayed there for probably 6 or 7 years, and I got the itch to move on, and that was the point in time in which all this work in VEGF was being done and applied to ophthalmology, and a company was formed really by a group of ophthalmologists to develop the drug Macugen for macular degeneration. And so I decided to leave academia and joined iTech in New York to help bring that drug to market. Remember, at that point in time, there was no therapy for macular degeneration. So this was of interest, it was of import, it mattered to patients, and I thought it would be a healthy and interesting thing to do. Macugen did get approved, and for a very short time was a wildly successful drug. And then after a year, Lucentis came out, and Lucentis was a better drug. And so Macugen quickly disappeared, and that company was bought by another pharma company. And then I went on and did a couple of startups in ophthalmology and glaucoma. The measure of success in a pharma company is flipping the company and cashing out. And there's no longevity to it. There's no institutional memory. It's pretty much a financial adventure. And I did that a few times. I said, okay, done enough of this. And then I wanted something different. I wanted to come back to academia. And at this point in time, my eldest son, who, let's just say, had a tortured path of his own, graduated medical school and decided he wanted to be an ophthalmologist. And when my kids were very young, I used to say to them, you could do anything you want. You could do retina, you could do glaucoma, you could do anterior segment. And sure enough, one of them grew up to be an ophthalmologist. So I decided, wouldn't it be wonderful if he and I could work together at the same hospitals? And I came back and joined Montefiore with David and had some wonderful years with my son. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is the kinds of things that I've learned and seen living in both industry and academia, and tips for those of you who might be thinking of becoming an entrepreneur in ophthalmology. When I left academia to join industry, the first thing I actually worried about, being the elitist that I am, was, would these people in industry be as smart as my peers in academia? The answer is absolutely so. There was no question in my mind, but the talent I saw in industry was equal to the talent I saw at a university. You know, there's a bell-shaped curve everywhere, with two tails to that bell-shaped curve, but the people in industry were up to it. They were equally intellectually gifted, worked equally hard, and I wasn't at all disappointed. One of the things I found most interesting about being in industry was that in academia, most of my peers were my age. And so the people I related to were pretty much my age. In industry, it was very different. I had a role, everybody had their own role, and often I'd be working alongside with somebody 20, 25 years younger than myself, which was an interesting and healthy experience. In fact, my boss at iTech was younger than myself. I had interviewed him for a residency years ago, and now he was my boss at iTech. The incentives are different in academia and industry. I think that one can do well financially, frankly, any place. In academia, you know, there's a lot of neuroticism and narcissism, equally so in industry. In industry, you're trying to bring a helpful drug to market to help patients, and that's your motivation. But behind you is a series of investors and stockholders, and all they care about are the bottom line and money. Were the ethics different in industry and academia? No, I don't think so. There are scoundrels everywhere. The ethics in academia, again, is a bell-shaped curve. Most people do a good job, do the right thing, do the thing right in both academia and industry. And my experience was that it wasn't any different in terms of people's behavior in one sphere or another. The drivers are different. In industry, the drivers are success in getting a drug to market and then marketing the drug. In academia, it's a little more cloudy. You do have the educational piece in academia of training the next generation, which is something very powerful and very meaningful. To have the opportunity to be a teacher and to train the next generation of physicians really is perhaps the most powerful and important thing we do. In retrospect, the real difference that I saw between industry and academia was spin. Let me try to explain what I mean by this. In medicine, spin isn't an issue. If I think somebody has an optic neuritis, I can outline the reasons I believe that and what I think would be the most appropriate therapy and what I think would be the healthy way to evaluate and work up the patient. No hidden agenda. I could be right. I could be wrong. Honest men might disagree and disagree with me. In industry, there's a very different set of rules. As a CEO in industry, talking on an investor call, you always have to put your best foot forward. You can't say, well, these results were disappointing. These results show our drug doesn't really work as well as we thought it should. We're having a bad quarter, and I'm concerned we won't survive. You've got to put spin on the discussion to support the company and the product and the investors. And that doesn't exist in the academic world. In the academic world, you can be much more direct and frank and blunt. In industry, when you're having conversations, you're always putting your best foot forward. You're not being dishonest, but perhaps you're not telling the entirety of the truth. And that is a difference that I saw between industry and academia. In academia, you could be very straight and clear. In industry, you had to be more guarded of what you said and how you said it. Personal rewards. As I mentioned, educating the next generation of doctors, major plus. Intellectual honesty. You could have that in both arenas. What about the impact of one person in pharmacy, in pharmaceutical industry versus academia? In fact, if you look at it objectively, you could probably have much more impact in industry as one person, because you could perhaps discover a drug and bring it to market. In academia, you're one person amongst many. You have an ability to add to the knowledge base of the world, but it's in a different way. If you bring Lucentis to market as an individual who does the basic research or does the drug development, think about the impact you have in terms of what you've accomplished. Financial rewards, I believe, are available in both arenas. The ability to be creative is available in both arenas. The ability to think about mindfulness is available in both arenas. That you carry between your ears. Longevity. Eye institutes, ideally, are forever. They're designed for patient care and education. Companies are not. Companies are designed to generate profits for their shareholders. And as I say, the mark of success of a startup company is to offer an IPO and to cash out. It's a very different mindset. Let's talk about some ways of thinking that are more on the industry side and perhaps advice for those of you looking to grow in this arena. One of the things that's important in industry is to be able to, quote, think outside the box. Take a compound that's used in one area, consider applying it to another area, formulating it differently, using it in combination with other drugs, but thinking creatively. Let me give you an example of thinking outside the box. Imagine the numbers in this Roman numeral equation to be movable sticks. Leaving the plus and equal signs as they are, what is the least number of sticks you would have to move to correct the equation? I want you to look at that and think about it. Each stick can be moved. What is the least number of sticks you have to move to correct the equation? If you understand the query and think about it, most people say, oh, I think I can fix that with removing one stick. In fact, no sticks need to be moved. Just flip that equation 180 degrees. And the equation is correct. That's how thinking outside the box is different than the usual way we're taught to think. And that's what is often required in industry. A couple of helicopter view statements, the hierarchy of metrics in industry, that I've learned the hard way. A great asset, a good asset, trumps mediocre management. Great management can't overcome a weak asset. If your drug doesn't work, the best management in the world can't bring it to success. When a manager with a reputation for excellence meets an industry noted for great difficulties, it is the industry that emerges with its reputation intact. Now, let's talk about some specifics and some granularity here. If you have an idea that you want to try to develop either a device or a drug or a compound or a therapy, you must recognize that you need to protect that idea. Because if you don't, frankly, its value becomes zero. The way to protect your idea is to get intellectual property protection. And you have to do that before you publish or present any of the material derived from your idea and device. Once it's in the public realm, you can't get intellectual property surrounding it. When you want to bring an idea or device to market, the first question potential investors will ask you is, well, what IP do you have? How protected is this compound? How protected is this device? How protected is this idea? And so you have to get lawyers involved, painful as that may be. You must do this before you present or publish, because prior art is no longer patentable in the world. Next thought. You can't do this type of thing by yourself. You have to choose your advisors and your compatriots carefully. And it's important to recognize and admit that there are more horses' asses in the world than there are horses. And so you have to choose your team carefully. You want them to be experienced and knowledgeable, to know what they're doing. You've got to get consultants that have lived in this arena. You shouldn't be starting by yourself from day one. And anytime you discuss any of these ideas with potential consultants or partners, you must have them under a confidentiality agreement, a CDA, so that you can share with them what you want to, but they can't take and then run off with that idea on their own. You need to build a core team. I'm actually friends with someone who's starting a company now, a very brilliant ophthalmologist, and she's doing it on her own. She's convinced that she can do this all. I believe that's a mental error. You need to put together a team. You need to put together a team of people who have done this before, know the world that's out there, know how to behave, who to talk to, who the good consultants are, and who to shy away from. And you also have to know where the landmines are. Experience in this arena is imperative. You need to understand the difference between a company and a product. The product is the asset you choose to develop, be it a drug or a device. The company is the group of people you put together to make this a reality. And remember, this is a marathon. This is not a sprint. All of these things take great amounts of time and great amounts of money. You also have to be realistic as to what it takes to bring a drug or a device to market. Tools or instruments are relatively inexpensive. A similar device like a different fluorescent angiography camera can be scored as a 510K device, relatively inexpensive. But if you're bringing a drug to market, you've got to plan for 5 or 10-year haul and $50 to $200 million in ophthalmology. If you're talking about non-ophthalmic drugs, the cost of bringing non-ophthalmic drugs is even considerably higher. So this is a major undertaking that requires energy, personnel, and dollars. Think through what you want your role to be in this process. You can't be the chief executive and the operating officer and the scientific officer and the study coordinator and the marketing person and the finance person. Figure out where you fit in the puzzle and then complement your talents and interests with others who add to what you bring to the table. Know your own limitations. Very difficult to do. Recognize your weaknesses. Recognize where you need help. Recognize where you have no experience. Very important to do for ultimate success. Set realistic expectations. Everybody wants to be a billionaire. But the truth of the matter is, a small piece of a big pie is much better than a big piece of nothing. Lower your expectations in terms of what will be financially and the ultimate possibility of success. Recognize that most startups in ophthalmology as well as other fields fail. Nonetheless, many can succeed and do succeed. And in truth, the financial success is just part of the reward. Your real objective is to see your idea, your device, your drug become a reality and help patients. Talk about money. Money is the most expensive thing you'll have to buy in this world. And there are lots of sharks out there who are delighted to help you. They're the ones who often benefit most. Let's look at funding sources and see what the difference is for different stages of development. Early on, as you're trying to develop your idea, do a pilot study, do some animal tests. You really need a relatively small amount of money, perhaps $50,000. As you get some data that convinces you this drug or this device is worthy, you need to move into another arena and begin to think about a startup company, and perhaps you'll need $100,000. You can get the $100,000 from small business grants, foundations, some universities, what we call angel investors. Wealthy individuals who'll say, I'll give you $100,000, you give me a piece of the company going forward. As you continue your work, continue doing the research, collecting the data, trying to think about what you need to do to be able to bring this drug or device into man, you move into a different order of magnitude of needs. And you're going to need outside money, institutional investors. Perhaps you'll start off with $1 million in your startup company, but if you really expect to take this to fruition, to do pivotal trials, you're going to need the order of magnitude of $100 million. The most difficult place to raise funds is here. After you've got some data, after you've got a second piece of data, before you get the outside investors, there's a real innovation gap that's very difficult to bridge. Expect it and plan for it. The first $500,000 are the hardest to come by. Family, friends, founders in the company, angel investors, those are the places you'll have to look to get started. The next step allows you to go to some foundations and research bodies. I'm sure you'll have some of these different ones available to you in Saudi to go to help you start and build a company. In the U.S., we have the National Eye Institute, the Small Business Administration, the Glaucoma Foundation, Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundations, foundations that are prepared to help an entrepreneur begin an idea. In the U.S., one of the major sources of funding is the National Eye Institute. But you see how perhaps 28% of grants are funded. So entrepreneurs have to look elsewhere. Let's go back and begin with the angel investors. There is a list of the 20 most active angel investors that you can get. Here is such a list. These investors will give you $1 or $2 million as you start up to test out the reality of your idea, to establish what's called proof of concept. So the angel investors come in, wealthy individuals giving you that first piece of money, helping you once you're off the ground going further. And there are different angel investors in different areas. These are the ones that play in the ophthalmology space. There's another mechanism to raise money in ophthalmology. It's called incubators. These are organizations that are designed to help ophthalmology companies get started. Perhaps the most famous one is Foresight Labs, Jean Dewan's in California, who will be running 3 or 4 different startup companies at any one time. Big Pharma has money available for startups and incubators and acceleration. There's money available to do this if you search it out. We talked about the innovation gap. We have to then move on to filling that gap. And the way most startup companies fill the gap of raising additional dollars is to go to the venture capital world. Now, the venture capital, let me explain how that works. A group is formed of venture capitalists. They go out and raise a fund. They go out to wealthy individuals, to universities, to businesses, foundations, and say, give me a piece of money, we'll invest it for you, and we'll diversify that fund, and you can expect over a handful of years a return that beats the stock market or the bond market. So they take other people's money and package it. They'll often raise $500 million in a fund, and then they'll take that $500 million and invest it many places, perhaps giving each place $10 million. Now they expect 1 in 10 of their investments to hit. That's their expectation. And when they lend you this money, they take a piece of the company, and the term sheet is always very interesting to look at because, of course, it's designed with their benefits and advantage in mind. And so it'll play out something like this. Okay, we'll give you $10 million, and we'll take X percentage of the company. They'll give you a valuation. And then if things hit for your company, what they do is first they take a multiple of their 10 million. So they'll say, okay, I gave you 10, I want 30 million back up front, and then they expect the 30% of the company. So it's very expensive money, and you're giving away control, and you're giving away a lot of the company, but frankly that's what people have to do to start these companies, is get big money elsewhere. And as there's a list of venture capitalists, you can imagine, this is a list of the venture capitalists who play in ophthalmology, and typically they give $5, $10, or $20 million for an investment in a startup company. If we look at total venture capital investments, biopharm versus medical devices, what we see is there's a little more money put into drugs than devices, but it's been pretty static over the last decade. What about the number of dollars invested in ophthalmology? Again, over the last decade, it's been increasing, but in fact, it hasn't been increasing dramatically. And in truth, there's probably 15 or 20 investments in ophthalmology startups per year. What about indications in ophthalmology? Overwhelmingly, most of the money has been going into macular degeneration. Secondly, in glaucoma. Everything else falls off dramatically and falls by the wayside. So most of this money has been invested in retina and glaucoma. What happens with these biotech companies? Well, the stock market in the U.S. has done very well over the last decade, and biotech has led the way. Biotech has performed better than the average stock market fund. Of course, past performance is no predictor of future returns. IPOs, the initial public offering of these ophthalmology companies. Here's a list of IPOs over the last decade, and you can see that many of them are household names now, from Alcon, Alimera, Bausch & Lomb, Ophthatech, Aerie, 11. These are companies that started as startups and then went on the public market and sold shares. What about industry partnerships? for those interested in developing a drug or device. Most every big pharma, middle-sized pharma, specialty pharma would be glad to talk with you and perhaps partner with you in your development of your drug or device. Of course, they do share in the profits, but they have a lot of expertise and experience behind them. And this is just a partial list of the companies that are actively doing this even now. They have internal mechanisms to support drug and device development. This is a money-driven process. When you do a startup company, you likely have to allow yourself 1 full year at least to raise the money to get going. And in truth, the major cause of startup failure is the inability to raise sufficient funds at the get-go. So you have to be able to raise enough money to get to a meaningful milestone. You have to get to a meaningful milestone so that other investors will say, yeah, there's real promise here. We'll keep you going. You need to seek out experienced investors, people who have experience in this arena. Don't walk in as a cowboy. Don't walk in by yourself. You give what's called a presentation to these groups. You give them an overview of the science and the clinical applicability and the potential market for what you're interested in. When you do this, you need a business plan. You need to show them what your ideas look like on paper. You need to be honest about the strengths and weaknesses of the potential opportunity. You need to show them you understand the market you're trying to break into. You need to put together a legitimate, reasonable budget and how you'll use the funds and what milestones you expect, when you expect results. You've got to let this be clinically driven and data driven. It can't just be a smile and a handshake. You have to show them the experiments you're going to do for proof of concept, how you're going to take this device or drug into animal models and then present it to the FDA to be allowed to use it in man. Presentation's your story. You've got to tell it convincingly, compellingly, and it's got to be realistic, and it's got to be convincing. Convincing to investors who are, in a sense, they're venturing other people's money, but they're investing in what they think has at least a 1 in 10 shot of success. When you do your presentation, you don't ever want to say, oh, I know you can't read this slide in the back of the room. You want to give them something not like this, but a really story. Tell them a story. Tell them about macular degeneration. Tell them about people going blind. Tell them about the lack of an effective therapy that reverses this. Recognize that people can't listen and read at the same time. And so when you're showing your slides and people are reading, they're probably not listening to you. Also recognize that the average attention span of an adult is 7 minutes. After 7 minutes, people's minds wander and they're thinking about something else or somebody else. So you've got to get to the meat of the argument rather quickly. You need to believe in your vision. Steve Jobs was absolutely remarkable at talking to crowds, explaining what he was going to do, explaining what he did do, and telling his story. And he would always say, people don't know what they want until I show them. If you partake of this arena, this sandbox, remember you got to follow your own inner self, not others. You've got an idea, believe in it, work on it, persevere, and see where it takes you. And remember the wonderful quote of Steve Jobs, here's to the crazy ones, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules. You can disagree with them, glorify or vilify them, but the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward, and while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see them as genius. Because the ones who are crazy enough to think that they can change the world are the ones that do. And the last thing he said that's so compelling, what separates the successful entrepreneurs from the non-successful ones is pure perseverance. Now, the interesting thing is you often don't have to leave your day job to do this. When iTech was formed as a company, the chairman, the chief executive officer of the company, was a chairman of a department of ophthalmology, and he kind of did this on the side. So you can begin in this arena without giving up your day job. I want to stop there and thank you for your attention and be glad to answer any questions. Thank you. Thank you so much for your attention. David. Price of drugs. Yeah. Pharmaceutical industries are run as businesses, and so their goal is to maximize profits. They don't look at what it costs them to manufacture a drug and then price it accordingly. They say, what can we get away with in terms of pricing this drug? And in the U.S., there's really no cap on what you can charge for a drug. Overseas, in the EU, there is. There's a discussion, and the people who approve drugs talk about the cost of the drug and what they'll be allowed to charge. In the U.S., the manufacturer sets the price of the drug, and he or she or the companies decide what they think is reasonable given other similar drugs in the market. And there's no law that says a drug has to be sold for the same price in market A as in market B. So companies can price discriminate, charge more in the U.S. if the government's paying for it, charge less overseas. This is allowable. It's not terribly fair or ethical, but it's done all the time. The price of drugs is something that is not well controlled in North America. It is better controlled in Europe. In Europe, when a drug is approved, commonly now the drug has to be shown to be better than a currently available drug. In the U.S., that's not true. A drug just has to be shown to be efficacious to be approved. It doesn't need to be shown to be better than another drug in the market. So it is a peculiar arena. The rules are always changing, and it's gray area, and it is financially driven, but that's the reality we now live in. Thank you so much for your attention.